No? Why not? No?
If you're 5 minutes after the...
Yeah,
I
sure.
want to discuss
Yes, yeah.
but you are very, very busy.
No. No, I'm happy to meet you here. High priority. Ist da jemand draußen, um die Leute reinzuholen?
So, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the second day of our conference. I hope you had a good evening yesterday. We had a great day yesterday already. Lots of very interesting, exciting presentations, also discussions between the sessions and also in the evening. There are still people coming in. Please do not internalize this clock. That's a little behind the schedule. Yeah, we have a great day ahead of us, great program. And I give you a quick introduction to the day today. If this works, I could operate it, but it seems not. We will...
Sie können schalten?
Nee, transportiert nicht.
Okay, dann machen wir Folgendes.
We will have 2 keynotes in the morning.
Das passt super. Wir haben gar keine Maus.
Okay.
Okay,
Now it works.
I will start again. Okay, yes.
So we will have 2 keynotes in the morning, exciting topics, very good presenters, and also a very good chair. After the 2 keynotes, we will take a group photo. And a colleague will stand here with a green umbrella and guide us all to the place where we take the photo. And probably some more colleagues coming in, and please inform them and just grab them to the photo. We have a coffee break after that, and then we have the first block of parallel sessions, same mode as yesterday. The rooms are indicated, the topics are indicated, the program of who is presenting in the sessions you find online. After that, we have a lunch break, and then we have 2 more blocks of sessions, and at 15:15, 3:15, we have the poster exhibition in the marketplace. So the poster exhibition is, of course, a very exciting highlight here as well. And we would like to remind you of your opportunity to vote for posters. So we have what we call a crowd voting. And we collect the votes and consider those votes together with the scientific committee and their impression to come to a final sort of assessment of the posters. And there will also be a poster award within 3 categories that we have also in the title of our conference, related to visions, related to technologies, and related to actors. The prizes, what are the prizes will be, we will inform you tomorrow in the wrap-up session. Very nice prizes. Okay. We have in the evening a conference dinner at 7 o'clock. Excuse me. There's a little traveling involved. You can take the tram in front of the building, tram number 61 or tram number 63. It takes about 18 minutes to get to the castle of Köpenick. That's a suburb area here in Berlin. Yes, I suppose we will go in groups so that nobody gets lost. And we have pleasant weather forecast for tonight. There is a kind of a landscape park. We can be outside. We will also be inside. So I think it's a nice location to spend a nice dinner evening together. Yeah, and with this, I wish us an exciting second day of the conferences. Lots of great and interesting presentations, and I would like to hand over to David to introduce our first session and the 2 first keynote speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just to reiterate on the poster award, because I've had the great pleasure as part of the scientific committee to look at so many posters and judge them over the last day or 2. Please do vote, because we've got a short list of very many wonderful posters, so the results of the democratic vote might be quite informative and help us decide who wins, although, of course, there are many good ones. For those that don't know, I think I've got 5 minutes, so no one misses the start of Brajesh's talk. I'm David Rose. I'm the Elizabeth Creek Chair of Sustainable Agricultural Change at Harper University in the UK. So that's our largest specialist agricultural university. And our group works on lots of different aspects of change. So firstly, helping us to understand how we can include human and non-human actors in the co-design of what those changes should be. Secondly, thinking how we can help land managers make the changes that we are asking or telling them to make through better designed policy instruments and behavioural interventions. Thirdly, to think who the winners and losers of change might be and how we can move towards more responsible and just transitions. And lastly, to think how we help land managers cope with change with a particular focus on mental health and well-being. I should also say briefly, because this organisation paid for my ticket here, that I'm representing the Centre for Effective Innovation in Agriculture as well. And that's a collaboration between 5 UK universities to work with policymakers and funders so that they design policy instruments and funding competitions that are most likely to make a difference on the ground, on the farm, when they're funding agricultural innovation. And I think I have a colleague somewhere from the Royal Agricultural University, Katie Crouch, and we're running a session later on innovation adoption. But I was delighted to be asked today to chair this very important keynote session. This session covers the 2 really important aspects of change. So in order for us to make the sustainable changes that are needed for society and for the planet, we need the science to tell us how to manage land better for people, production and the planet, and Brajesh will talk a little bit about that shortly. But we also need the social science to understand both how we can help land managers implement those changes, but also who the winners and losers of those changes might be. And Robert's going to tell us a little bit about farmer decision-making and policy-making and that role in helping us make sustainable transitions. Now, I will introduce Robert shortly before his talk. He is on second. I wanted to start with Brajesh. So I think I had 5 minutes. I could have wrote a longer list here, but I had to condense this down. We have 2 very distinguished speakers today, but Brajesh certainly is a distinguished professor because that is the title on which his university has bestowed on him. He is the Distinguished Professor of Soil Biology at Western Sydney University. That rank, I think, is reserved for only the university's most impactful professors. So he has over 300 publications. He's been awarded fellowship at the Soil Science Society of America and the Australian Academy of Science. He's won the J.A. Prescott Medal for an outstanding contribution to soil science in Australia, the Humboldt Research Award. He's chair of the FAO's International Network of Soil Biodiversity. He's editor-in-chief of the Journal of Sustainable Agriculture and Environment. There's many other things I could list, but without further ado, I wanted to introduce and thank Professor Brajesh Singh for his time today and for his travel. He's going to talk to us about emerging biological tools to increase agro-ecosystem sustainability. Thank you, Brajesh.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for very, very kind introductions. Let me start with thanking the organizers, particularly the Stephen Kolbs and Gabby Bergs for inviting me and asking me to come and share some of my research. My presentation, there it is. Is on the emerging biological tools for agroecosystem sustainability. It is some level a technical presentations, but what I have tried to avoid technical side of the technical work, I guess. Probably what I'm trying to say that I will give the message that what we found rather than how we did it and going in details on the methodology and the outcomes sort of things. But before we go there, it is important that we remind ourselves how important is the healthy soils. When I go to my class, the undergraduate class, first thing I say that there's no life possible, terrestrial life, possible on Earth because the functions, in the absence of the functions of the soils and healthy soils. And this is because that almost all planetary functions, from primary productivity to the regulations of carbon, nitrogen, and water, to the providing the habitats for the biodiversity, soils have an enormous role and as a major contributor. From the human health point of view, which I'm not going to cover today, is this enormous, every aspect of human health is impacted by the soil health and soil microbial community, particularly if you look at the food, just for the food, 90% of calorie intake even today comes from the soil. And so healthy soil, and that's is critical for the delivery of the most of the sustainable development goals of United Nations. And because they provide all these important functions and services. But what I'm going to talk about, those functions and services the healthy soil provides are carried out by the soil biology, soil biodiversity, which will be the focus of my presentation today. From the agriculture perspective, please do not read that slides. From the agriculture productivity, each and every functions that is needed for the primary productivity or farm productivity, from the nutrient cycling to carbon storage, the pest and pathogen controls, to the pollution, soils have a major contributions to make it. And the productive systems will require healthy soils and healthy biological activity within it. And this is why this is important, the soil biodiversity is that important, because they are also account for the majority of the global biodiversity. Soil is a home of 59% of global biodiversity. How important the soil habitat is for the biodiversity, you can imagine from that. With that introductions, I have my presentation divided into 4 different categories. One is to looking at the importance of the soil biodiversity, what are their drivers and mapping. We need to know where are the beneficial microbes, where are the harmful microbes, so we can plan, we can monitor and plan the interventions for the agricultural productivity. What is the relationship between biodiversity and ecosystem functions at the scales, particularly those are directly linked to the agricultural productivity. And in the last 2 sections, then I will talk mainly about the microbial tools that is in the market currently, in what is a constraint and how we need to address going forward. This is a landscape conference. So what I'm going to do to use the landscape processes to put my presentation in that format. Any landscape processes requires to address the structure, so the biodiversity side of things, functions, and the changes, and I will put my presentation in that context as I go forward. So let us start with the microbial diversity on the soil biodiversity as a whole. We had a very little knowledge, I will say, at the scale, when we're talking about a scale of the regional and global scale, say that 2 decades ago. And this is one of the work done by the Noah Ferreira of Colorado University. It is a synthesis of the paper. He brought through all the papers from last 20 years in a review articles and look at that what are the critical driver of the soil, in this case, the bacterial communities across the globe. And not surprisingly, you will see that the soil pH, organic carbon as a food and the resource for the microbes, soil redox potential, and so forth and so on. We did our own work in some level, and we come up that, of course, those factors are important, but in fact, at the global scales, the most important factor is the climatic conditions. So the annual mean temperature, annual precipitations, and seasonal variability. Those are the main drivers of the microbial communities, just like probably plant and animals, while that changes when you look at the regional scales and the local scales. I'll come to that in a minute. One of the more interesting findings from our research was that we still find the signature of the paleoclimate impact on the community structures across the globe. So let's start with, I said that I will not go into detail of the technical studies, but we'll talk about the drivers and the distributions of the beneficials and harmful organisms. As I said that probably decade and a half ago, it was almost considered impossible to describe the distributions of the microbial community, leave alone the mapping and the projections for the future. The technology has changed, so does the science and our ability to with the machine learning approach and the computing facility, and that has advances this area quite a lot. Here in this work, what we consider the global distributions and the mapping of the dominant soil biota. Soil biota have millions and millions of species. There is no way at this moment we look at each and every and how they are distributed. But ecological framework, the dominant species are major contributor of the most of the functions, and those are the focus of this study. What are the dominant species of bacteria? We done bacteria, fungi, cyanobacteria, lichens, some animals, I don't even remember. And so we did systematically this study, that which are the dominant species, what are their drivers. Most of the cases, as I said, it will be climatic conditions, pH, and aridity index across the globe. We look at the drivers, first what are the drivers, and then look at the clusters that which organism, dominant species, dominate a particular biome. So the higher aridity, hyperaridity area, the high pH or low pH soils, low carbon soils. And use that information to map their distributions across the globe. And I hope you can see that this is a global soil pH map, and this is a global aridity map. The projections we make for those dominant species, dominant in the arid and the high pH soil, you can see almost a mirror image. So we can map microbial community based on the few sampling. With this one probably less than 300 sites across the globe. And we then validated that, in fact, with to go and sampling randomly across the region to make sure that our modeling or the mapping is accurate. So that's the abiotic drivers, the climatic conditions, and the soil conditions. There is a biotic drivers as well. And so one of the things we wanted to know why these organisms are dominant in particular environment. This is just an example of the in hyperarid areas. Hyperarid areas are characterized as a low carbon, high pH. You're looking at mostly 8 and 9. As a result, high salt concentration in the soils. And what we found in those through the genome, looking at their genomes, is that they have the transporter genes that allow them to expel the sodiums from their body. So when they, in the normal day-to-day activities, they extract moistures and the waters and the nutrients from the soils. Salts comes along with it because salt is high concentration. These microbes are dominant in these regions because they have that genetic trait to expel the salts, and so they maintain the osmolality of the cells. So the genetic trait is important as well. The second part, as I said, the drivers changes with the scale. So that was a global scale, so where you have variations in temperatures, the seasonality, and the precipitations. But if you look at the local space or regional space, this is Scotland, we have done for the Australia, China, and a few other regions. Look at the driver changes because climate does not vary. Temperature does not vary in Scotland that much from one end to other end, or the precipitation does not vary. So other factors then becomes main drivers. For example, for Scotland, it was the habitat turnovers as well as nutrient stoichiometry, so the ratio of the carbon and nitrogen and carbon and phosphorus, that were a predictor of the microbial communities and their distributions in the regional scales. So as I said, the driver changes with the scales. But what happens to the relationship between biodiversity and ecosystem function? And because this is a critical information, because unless you know what the service the microbes provides, not in terms of the rate of service, but the relationship between diversity functions that inform you what you need to preserve and what you don't need to preserve, or what we need to conserve. So we look at, again, the global scales to the pretty lower scales. This is global studies we look through across the globe. What you are seeing in this slides is there's a relationship, linear relationship between soil biodiversity, different taxa, bacteria, fungi, fungi, and some of the soil animals. All linear relationship between soil biodiversity and multifunctionality. I want you to look into this, a black one. This is multi-diversity, so all the diversity merge into one. You said the relationship becomes stronger, a relationship becomes even more steeper. What it suggests, this is not the collective effect, but also the interactions between different organisms that ultimately determines the outcome of the ecosystem functions. So that was the global scales. We have done at the regional scale. This is a continental scale in Australia, but also in Scotland and in China and other part of regions. Same relationship persists, the same relationship between the biodiversity ecosystem functions. We then gone into the micro scales. Microbes are microscopic, see, less than 2 centimeters, less than 2 micrometers in their size, all right? So those functions happens at the microscopy level. So we went in to look at that, is that relationship of biodiversity ecosystem maintained at the microscopic and to the global scale? So here you have 6 different microbes that grow separately and then combine them in different combinations to look at the biodiversity and the multifunctionality. Here you have a soil dilution, so you have a soil diversity and you dilute it down the diversity by tenfold, so you have a diversity gradient. In both those microscopic structures, you see the relationship between biodiversity and ecosystem functions remain consistent across all scales. Saying that, I should also say that in the ecology, there is always a context. In some relationship, in fact, some of the sites, you will see that relationship very strong. Other, you will see that is less strong. Sometimes even you will see the neutral and negative strengths. But the majority of the work, if you look into that, those relationship, a positive relationship between biodiversity and ecosystems is maintained. Why it is important from agriculture point of view? As I said, that all of functions that a good productivity requires in the field requires the biodiversity actions and biodiversity functions. And there is a growing sort of evidence where you see that the diversities will be alpha diversity or beta diversity, and there's different sort of biodiversity, microorganisms or soil biota, is linked somehow to the agriculture productivity, or at least the stability of the agriculture productivity. Again, this is a context. There are some reports where you'll see there's no relationship. But majority of relationship, you'll see there is some relationship. And this is simply because the higher diversities can support the healthier soil health. Soil health is a concept. There's definitions we all wrestle against, so how we define the soil health. For me, it is a soil health is a living systems that provides the functions needed to deliver the ecosystem function and services. And this study just comes up a couple of months ago. They look at the soil health index. They derive from some of the physics, chemistry, and the biology sort of things, and look at the productivity across the Europe. And what you see, particularly in the cropland and the grassland, there's a strong relationship between the soil health index and the primary productivity. And what we see there, those driver of the soil health index contains mostly biological activities. There are soil pH and the soil organic matter, the critical component, but majority of them are the microbiota, the taxa that drive that productivity. So how does that happen? Soil health have 3 components: the physics, physical health, chemical health, and biological health. And I'll just take one slide each to explain how these things, the soil biodiversity drive that. But I should first say that there is never a linear relationship in nature, that one things drive others. There is always a feedback response. So if you have I'm going to say you how the soil biodiversity drive these functions, but if you have a healthy soil physical health, that will promote the healthy soil biodiversity as well. So there is always a physical loop that we should look at. For example, the physical health. Physical health, there are two critical components of soil physical health is aggregate stability and the porosity in the systems. That are carried out by the microbial community. This is just one example that there's a fungal hyphae, bring those soil particles together to form the aggregate stability, aggregates, as well as form the porosity in the soils. But this is just one example. There's a number of bacteria, archaea, a number of soil animals produce a number of adhesives that bind the soil particles to give them the soil structures and promote the soil health, physical health. Similarly, same thing is true for the chemical health. Here, I'm just taking example from the nutrient point of view because agriculture perspective, the availability of nutrients is critical. Here, this is a study we've done globally, and this is probably from Scotland. You see the phosphorus availability is significantly linked with the microbial diversity. As the microbial diversity increases, phosphorus availability increases. This study is done by a group in the USA. They look at quite a large scales in the USA, in Northwest, if I remember correctly, in the MH. And what they found that as the microbial diversity increased, the multi-nutrient cycling, so they look at the index from the carbon cycling, nitrogen cycling, phosphorus cycling, and potassium cycling, and then pull them together to look at the relationship between the microbial diversity and production. And that remains consistent as it moves forwards. The third component of health is a biological health. And I will take examples here, the suppression of the diseases. We know very well that the pathogen's presence is needed, host presence is needed for the disease, but that's not guaranteed the disease will happen and what is the outcome of disease. One of the components the concept is suppressing soil. So where the pathogen is present, the host is present, disease does not happen because soil have inherent characteristics to suppress those diseases in the systems. And we were looking at that aspect of the soil health here. And what we found, this is again the regional scale of all the cotton growing areas. I'm saying the regional scales, this is still 1,200 kilometer radius. Australia is a big country. And we sample across those areas. And three things that comes out to determine if the soil is disease suppressive or disease conducive was the soil microbiome compositions, aggregate stability, and the moisture, along with the pathogens abundance and the pathobiomes. So at the regional scales, you're again saying this is not driven by the climates, but other factors, so the soil and the biological factors within the systems. But that's obviously the regional level. We have also looked at, say that one of the aspects of agriculture is the pathogens. Pathogens cause a huge loss. Around 300 billion worth of productivity loss every year is caused by the plant disease. So it is a huge constraint in agriculture productivity. And we look at, again, the global distributions of the dominant pathogens. Obviously, we look at a lot more than 3. This is the example we took to show it here. So we look at the Fusarium Geosporum, Venturia, Formice species, and look their current distribution, how they are currently distributed across the globe. And then what we use the climate model to predict what will happen in 2060 and 2100. Obviously, I'm just giving you an example which shows that is directly linked to the temperature. So if the temperature grows up by 1.5%, 1.5 degrees centigrade, this is how this will look like. And that will have a huge impact on the disease outcomes and the severity of disease. The importance of that is you have started preparing the policy and the management policy now, intervention policy now, not waiting when the pathogens become so dominant. The people always ask these questions that these are the modeling. Where is the real meat? Show me the real evidence in terms of the empirical that these things happen. So what we did, we sampled across 3 sites, one in Europe, 2 in USA, that has a 10 years warming experiments. So they have ambient plots and 10 or plus years of warming experiments going on that. And what you see here, that our projections here is very similar to what the data is coming from the warming suggests that our projection is a consistent, that these micropathogens will increase with the time, with the warming. So that was the oomycetes and fungal pathogens. Another examples, recently this paper is still to be published, look at the bacterial pathogens across the globes. So with all the dominant species and some of the more dominant individual taxa, Rastolania and the Streptomyces scabies, and what we look, again, the same thing of where are they distributed, what are their drivers, and what the futures looks like for these organisms. What I want you to show here, though, these two things. If you look at again, it's not surprising at the global scales, the MAT and MAP, so the annual mean temperature and annual precipitations are the major driver. But the soil biodiversity, if you combine the fungal and bacterial diversity together, is one of the top predictor of the microbiome. So what are you saying? That you have a higher soil biodiversity, you have a lower pathogen abundance in those systems. And why this happens and why this is important, if you look from across the disciplines, so the medical science, if there is growing evidence, if your gut microbiome is more diverse in animal, in a plant, in a soil, in every discipline, when you have a higher diversity of the microbial communities, there's a lower abundance of pathogens and lower disease outcome. And the simple ecological principle is a niche occupation. If you have a more diverse ecosystem, most of the niches have been taken for by the different organisms. So pathogens has to come and colonize and fight for that, and most of the times they are not successful. So you have less pathogens and less disease outcomes, better disease outcomes, less severity of the disease in the systems. But diversity alone is not the sign of everything. And who are present there is also important. All right? In this global study, we also look at the beneficial microbes based on their genomes and MAGs and everything. And we look at the relationship with those beneficial microbe proportions and the pathogens load and disease severity across the globes. And you see there is a very good relationship. And why that happens? Because the metabolites these microbes produces inhibits the pathogens, but also promotes the plant growth. So it is a two-track impact. Wants to push away the pathogen, and second, to promote the plant pathogens, and that's why you get the lower disease severity in those conditions, or lower disease outcomes, lower disease severity in the suppressive soils. So this part of, I guess, presentations, I hope I have given you some information that we can look at the distribution of microbial community. We can identify the drivers. Those drivers changes with the scales. But irrespective of the drivers of the community, the relationship between the biodiversity and ecosystem functions remains consistent at all scales. I probably have also given you some evidence that the soil biology is a critical component of sustainable agriculture by contributing to every aspect of the soil health, particularly the physical and chemical and biological health of the soils. Applications that I wouldn't have a time to talk about, but these all findings have a huge implication in terms of developing the soil health indicators, monitoring, and future interventions, and developing the policies to maintain the productivity in 2060 and beyond. The next aspect is the emerging tools and in the agriculture's micrograms. And initially I had a very grand plan to talk about all the biologicals, and then I suddenly realized I can't. And so I'm going to just focus on the microbes just for the sake of the times. If you look, you have heard yesterday that how agriculture not only needs to increase the productivity for feeding the people, but also need to contribute to reduce the climate change, or mitigate the climate change, reduce the impact on the environment, reduce the impact on the biodiversities. And so there's a challenge that we need to reduce the chemical inputs, at the same time increases the productivity. And if you look at all sort of analysis that has done by across the globe by different organizations, FAO, other union organizations, this is a report come from the National Academy of Science and Engineering and Medicine from the USA. In almost every analysis, microbiomes comes as one of the 5 top tools that is supposed to contribute towards this goal. This is industry itself as well. This is not the only regions that driving this microbiome tools. If you look at the microbiome tools, is every aspect of our life is impacted. This is a very conservative estimate that 1 trillion industry is a microbial product. The more moderate, or I guess a liberal approach will be $3 trillion industry is a microbial product at this moment. In a biological sort of things, it had gone to 10 billion recently, and around 4 to 5 billion of the pesticides. Driven mainly by, at least moment, I believe, is the policy and the consumer demands. And one of the other aspects to note is that it is increasing, the its market value is increasing around 3.5 times faster than the chemical pesticides. But saying that, there's a large gap still to catch up that distance between the uses of the microbial inputs and the chemical pesticides. And if you look at the literatures again, there is evidence to suggest, and this is just one of our work, but there's a multiple work that has been done, particularly through the meta-analysis, where you see that if you compare to no treatments with the microbial immunoglobulins, there is a significant increase in productivity, almost 34% in our meta-analysis. I've seen other meta-analysis that has almost 40% increases. And if you then combine this microbial inoculation with the conventional farming, what I meant, particularly using some of the fertilizers, the nitrogen and phosphorus, you can further increase the productivity. But despite all this evidence, microbial tools are still at nascent stages. We always have this thing that this technology is about to take off, and we have been hearing that for the last 3 or 4 decades. It has not taken off for one other reason. And just put in the context that this is not a new tool. Rhizobia has been used by the farmers for more than centuries, all right? And Bacillus thuringiensis have been used for decades for the control of the pest. But why didn't it take it off, given all these benefits it has? The main reason is inconsistencies in the efficacy. It works in one field, it does not work in other fields. The other things that is really, in my own opinion, is one of the reasons that is inconsistent is the lack of product diversity. There's a million species of microbes, all right? And with all hundreds of thousands of species with a particular trait, but if you look in the market, it is Rhizobia, Azotobacter, Pseudomonas, Streptomyces, Bacillus, and 1 or 2 here and there. In bacteria and fungi, you'll have a Trichoderma, AM fungi, and here and there. So the product is based on what we can culture, but even more, what we can ferment and formulate into the markets. And that's the constraints our scopes. Microbes are living organisms, so we need to culture them, ferment them, formulate them, store them, transport them, and then take into the markets, all right? That's in the cells. You lose a significant amount of viable cells in all these processes. And those are the challenges that need to be addressed technically going forward. One of the things I'm not going to talk about is other factors. There's so many snake oil in the market today. There was an analysis done recently that 75% of the inoculant that is being sold worldwide have no viable AM fungi in it. So if you do not have a viable cells, how you expect that to work in the field? So that's another thing that's need to take in control through the regulations. So what are the solutions? I'm going to go from here on a little bit faster. There's a multiple sort of technological aspects that has advanced recently. One of this, I will take an example of 1 or 2 as I go forward. One of the things I suggest always, the targeted product. What I meant, if you look at all the products in the market today is that we look for a trait. So we want a nitrogen fixture, we went in the soil and extract the nitrogen fixtures. We want a biocontrol, we went for looking for the microbes that can control a particular pathogens. And then we culture them and throw them back in the soils and say, oh, this will work. It does not work because one of the critical conditions for microbial inoculants to work is the ability to go and colonize the plant roots. And if you don't achieve that, and it does not happen. So that's what I meant by the targeted product. I'll come to that in a minute. And then we probably also need to move forward to more efficient products. Rather than the one product, one cell, one species product, you can have a syncom, so the multiple species. I'm not saying this is easy. If there is industry people sitting here, they will say this is almost economically non-viable because of the cost of the fermentations. But this is something we should look at. And then looking at the biochemical product produced by the plants and the soil microbiota to use them. Then we have a system-based approaches that we need to address is, and I'll come to that. And last two, I will be not discussing that. Adoption things is Richard talking, so I'm guessing he will probably cover that. From the technical point of view, for me, is that we have got so excited about the opportunity of the microbial community, we forgot to address few fundamental questions in the microbial ecology about the inoculants. And for me, unless we address that using the eco-ecosystem interactions, we probably will have this inefficiency in the field going forward. What I meant by the targeted post, all organisms on our planet, including humans, we have evolved with the microbes. Okay, microbes come first and every other organism just come, evolve with the microbes. Just like every aspect of our health, the physiological, immunological, behavior, reproductive, psychological, every aspect of our health is impacted by the microbes that is in our gut, our skin, our airways. Plant is similarly dependent on. In fact, plant has even a stronger relationship because they have hundreds of millions years evolved together. And so what I meant by the core microbiota, those are the core microbiota that is present a particular species of plant irrespective of where you grow, where is the management practice, what is the soil types. So they have evolved with that plant. So if you target inoculants from those core microbiota, because they and develop that core microbiota, if you put in the field, the chances of the colonization is several-fold higher, because plant produces signal molecules, attract those microbes then respond to it, and they have that sort of understanding that the plant will not push them back. In fact, they will attract it. And so at least you tick a box of colonizations, which is, in my opinion, is a critical constraint in the microbial ecology, which drives the inefficiencies. Second thing is that the targeted post-up, there's a pathobiomes. Again, what is a pathobiomes? Comes from the medical science, where the microbes which are either positively linked with the pathogens infections or the negatively linked. The positively linked are the helper of the pathogens, while the negatively linked are the correlated, are the microbes that are try to suppress the disease through the pathogens impact. Targeting not all of them, but significant number of them. So targeting those microbes which are negatively correlated with your pathogens in the field conditions gives you better targeted, because they have evolved together again, they work in the field conditions, they colonize the plants, so you're ticking all these boxes to develop. And there is evidence coming through the number of research, at least. Those are the important aspects to consider. Microbiomes can also inform in which systems, so this is indicator, your microbial inoculants will be working or not working. This is work come from, again, from the Switzerland, from the Marcel Hisden group. There, he used the soil microbiome indexes to tell where the AM fungi inoculants can work and where you can't work. So then you look for the different inoculants, rather, or the different solutions if your soil is not going to respond to the inoculations. All this can be, from the ecological point of view, I'm guessing most of you are landscape ecologists here, bringing that ecological framework can change dramatically. This is invasions. You are introducing a new microorganism in your environment, all right? So this is what we call the alien species. There's a microbial species, and the inoculants, you have isolated in some very different environment, then you are putting in a very different environments. So it needs to have a flexibility to cope with the changes in the moisture, changes in the temperature, changes in the pH of the soils. That flexibility then allows them to go and move towards the plants. But then there's a biotic constraint, the indigenous microflora and the plant immune systems. And so that inoculants, when you develop, should have that capability to adapt and able to colonize the plant roots by overcoming those biological constraints. Then only you have a successful colonization. And this then requires a very simple invasion theory framework we have, is that you need to have a better dispersal ability, you need to have a better competitive establishment, selections and establishment, and ultimately look at the drift and the evolutionary aspects. That provides you, in my opinion, if you embed that things in development, a better inoculation industry. Inoculants. And none of the products in the markets have that sort of aspect at this moment. And there is research evidence to suggest that microbial better colonizers will have better outcomes in the glasshouse and the field conditions. Last 2 slides is about moving on from the inoculation. As I said, it's a living organism. It has its own constraint. If you move on to look at the metabolites that the plant produces or the microbes produces for a particular phenotypes, so for example, if the plant produces a chemical signals to attract to able them to cope with the disease, you can target that metabolites and use that metabolites. They does not need to be cultured, does not need to be fermented. You can just use that metabolites, and that will then bring the beneficial microbe already in the soils to provide the solution. And the advantage of this approach is that you do not have to change your traditionally conventional methods, because you can use it as a seed dressing or as in the irrigations or any other mechanisms you have the agronomic practice in the field conditions. This can also inform you if the microbial metabolites, which microbial metabolites attracts the beneficial microbes and its action, you can then look at that gene or the QTL and manipulate it through the plant breeding or genetic breeding to achieve that target that way. I should also suggest this one slide that not one solution will solve the problem of agriculture. Chemical solution has not, plant breeding has not, microbiome will not, and other technology, digital technology will not. It is bringing them together. That's where the solutions will come through. And one of the things I say that artificial intelligence, we should adopt it as soon as we can, because this is going to inform every aspect of research and tools we are developing today, not very far in distance. We are talking about in probably decade times and those sort of things. From the detections to the monitoring and the intervention, all aspects is being already informed in the research. It will also inform the agronomic decisions. So for me, the take-home message from here is the enormous potential of the microbial tools as a part of the bigger solutions. But we need to address some of the fundamental questions. We have not done it. Once we've done that, some of the things I haven't talked about, the applied and translational constraints in the formulation is one of the largest constraints in the ecology. But it will ultimately be bringing together all these tools from the different tables to address the problem holistically. With that, I thank you for your time, and thanks all these people, past and present, in my lab who have contributed this work I have presented on their behalf. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that very inspiring presentation. So I think we've got about 11 or 12 minutes for questions, if there are some. There is one over there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brajesh. I really enjoyed your global and holistic view on the topic. And I was really impressed about the new results linking soil pathogens and microbial diversity. I mean, this is what we have seen at small scale for a long time, but this is evidence for large scale. And of course, we can do something with microbiome solutions. But in addition, I think we also have to completely change the chemical treatment, because at the moment, this is really targeting the fungi. But you had this example with verticillium, so it's also essential for many plants to, in the ripening process. So, and get rid of these organisms makes no sense at all. So what would you suggest in discussion with industry? Which chemicals should they develop in future?
So I'll start with the first that I am one of the persons who believe that synthetic chemistry have a huge importance for the human society. Don't get me wrong, they look at from the medicine, everything they provide in the fertilizers and chemicals. Entirely synthetic chemicals, though, has not resulted into the benefits what we are looking at. Those chemicals I will take an example of pesticides. When we discovered the DDT, organochlorine, and we said, oh, we solved the world problem. We know what the DDT is banned decades ago, and it's still everywhere in the world. Then we developed, the greener things, that's organophosphorus, then we realize, no, it is such a devastating impact on the toxicity on the non-target organisms. Then we have gone through the nicotine, oh, this is a green technology. It is have no impact. Now we know what it's doing for all our pollinators. So the synthetic, what we need to take a step back for the approaches of those sort of things. I always give an example. In human medicine, almost 60% of our medicines have a natural origin. So we looked at the plants, the microbes, and those sort of things, and looked for the chemicals. And when we found that chemicals, then we use that chemical to synthesize and use it. If you look at the pesticides market, is only 11% of those have the natural evidence. All others are synthetic chemicals that we have developed. And I think this is where the opportunity is, to look for the bio-based sort of chemistry rather than the synthetic chemistry to find a solutions. If that answers your question, Gabby.
Okay, so also very here. Well,
Sorry.
of course, me. So I have a more general question. So in the introducing slides, you showed that we have a lot of knowledge to predict and describe distribution of microbes in soils on a global and regional level, and there is a lot of studies now out doing that. Would you agree with my perspective? We are not able in the moment to predict the distribution of the microbes and the ecosystem service they are providing for a specific acre.
A smaller scale is more challenging because I think what we need to go back is to look at the drivers. The larger scales, we have a better idea of their drivers, and we can use that to predict the distributions. Local scales, if you're looking for a couple of hectares, only probably is a difference, probably a few difference, and there's management practices, topography of the lands, I guess the soil, then there might have been some variation in the soil types. And as a result, at that scale, it is more difficult, honestly, to predict the community. So then at the landscape or the global scales. Saying that, there is tools now, and that includes the artificial intelligence, that we should be able to addressing those sort of issues as the technology has improved, if you combine that with artificial intelligence. And this is something we are trying to do, not very advanced stage, but this is one of the things trying to do. Can we map out, just like you said, the hectare sort of things, what is the distribution, and when they are active, when they are not active. All the microbes are not activated at the same time. It is if you have moistures, low moistures, temperature varies, and as a result, there is temporal variation in that relationship. So can we predict that on basis of that much frequency? It's a challenge, but I think there is a tool now to start addressing those issues.
Okay, thank you. I think I've got two waiting. Keep hands up if you've got any more so I can fit them in. One there, and then down.
Okay, thank you very much, Science. This is Gaowen from China Agro-Ecosystem. I have two questions. The first one is that you report that there is an increasing in pathogen abundance after warming, yes. Actually, I just with Matthias a few days ago. He observed that with the increasing number of global change factors, there also increasing in the pathogen on the surface of the plant leaf. So I'm just wondering why there, this kind of stressful, environment will select some pathogens, the favorite pathogens over other soil microbes. So the second question is that actually there are several ways to manipulate soil microbes in the field. One is, soil microbial inoculation, and I think another is to, you mentioned to add some chemicals, yes, to manipulate the soil biota.
Biochemicals, not
yes, biochemical. Okay. And third one, I think it might be to use some rotation. Yes, we use crops or other special plants to select some beneficial plants, and then after the next planting, those plants might be beneficial from the previous one. I think. What do you think? Which measurements we should use now? It should be for our, soil biota manipulation in the field. Yeah, this is two question.
Okay, so
Thank you so
if I got that question right, the first question was, correct me if I'm wrong, that why pathogens becomes dominant as warming, not the beneficials. That questions, if I ask me, I think we don't have that knowledge yet. That might change. What we are seeing in that projections, that the pathogens becomes dominant. What will be the disease outcomes? That is another things to look at. But the data does suggest that where you have a higher pathogens abundance, you probably have worse disease outcomes, all right? How much worse that will be, I don't think we have that quantitative information at this stage. Remember, particularly from the oomycetes organisms on the fungal pathogens, they have a huge impact, economic impacts on that. And in several areas, their growth is limited by two factors: the temperatures, the annual temperatures, as well as the moisture availability within the systems. And if those constraints will be removed or becomes less constraining, then you will expect those pathogens to become prevalent. Will that mean that the beneficial, some of the beneficial will also? It is very likely. But which beneficial, we have no knowledge. I guess because pathogen we know, all right? These are the pathogens that we want to track it. The beneficial at this moment, we're looking at the community level. I'm not saying that we have a good understanding, for example, in the AM fungi, for example, and other beneficial, like rhizobium. But when you talk beneficial, where I was talking about, I was still talking about 100 of different species of bacteria there, all right? So will their behavior changes? We have more likely the answer is yes, but how? We do not know yet. But this is something so we can, and we need to look into, and from the policy perspective. The second question is about crop rotation. Of course, crop rotation has been used since the civilization started, so the humans, to control the disease. That's not a new thing. This is one thing I always say is that when the peoples realize that their crops aren't grown, and I'm talking about 200 to 500 BC, before Christ, all right? The people started then rotating crops. They will not grow one type of crop, they grow something else. And this remains a critical tools for most of the soil-borne pathogens, because there is no chemical solutions. For Fusarium, Verticillium, Phytophthora, and Pythium, chemical solution is in there, and neither does the plant breeding solutions. So the solutions for the farmers is only solutions, the crop rotation, crop diversity, and those sort of things, or leaving the field for not using for the 10 or 15 years. So I have no doubt in my mind, those are the solutions and remain the main tool for the farmers to use it. But how sustainable it is, I'll give you an example. In Australia, we have the Verticillium dialy in the cotton. Usually, farmer will grow 5 or 6 years of cotton, and then won't grow anything for next 4 years, and the pathogen was built up, they will not grow anything, pathogen goes down, and they will bring the cotton again. That 5, 6 years is not valid anymore, that need 8 years. How long you going to leave your land and remain profitable in the farming, all right? So the microbes the pathogen is also evolving. As the farmers are evolving, pathogens is also evolving to cope with the practices we have in places and still cause the disease. So, of course, these are the only few tools we have at this moment, but in the future, we probably will need a better solutions and not keep, because we need all this land for feeding the people. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. I've only got 1 minute. I've got 2. I might only be able to take 1. So short, please, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you very much for a fascinating talk. Peter Feind, Humboldt-University. I'm a social scientist. So I was mostly interested in the vision that you presented in the second part of your presentation. And what I was taking away was that you were presenting new mechanisms that enable a more intense land use. And due to the images on your slides, I was a little bit concerned about the implications for landscapes as agro-ecosystems, because what you were showing were monocropping landscapes. So I was wondering how your vision, how these new tools, these new mechanisms will be applied or can be applied, how that aligns with your visions for the future of landscapes as agro-ecosystems.
Thank you. For me, the first and foremost thing is feeding the world. We cannot have a world where people are starved to death. and for where we are sitting today, the conventional farming has to be one of the tools, all right? Not the tool or not the only tool, but has to be one of the tools, all right? What we can do, where we can bring the sustainability. For example, people ask me about the nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizers. If you ask me honestly, I will say that in our generations, we will still use those chemical fertilizers if we want to feed the world. There is no, what we need to do is to bring sustainability, reduce the amount we are using. This is unnecessary. I'll give you an example. In Australia, we have hundreds of discussions with the farmers, not use 400 kilograms per hectare of the nitrogen. 150, you will get the same productivity. We get nowhere, all right? Because for them, this is insurance, all right? It doesn't cost me, it costs me just $few dollars, that's fine. So the challenge is to bring that sustainability in those systems. Can you combine the microbial, biological products with the conventional farming? I think this is where a lot of scope is, that you reduce the chemical fertilizers and not use any pesticide that is not needed, reduce the chemical fertilizer and supplement with some of the organic fertilizers. This is, if you want me, this is where I see we're going to make a progress in next 10 and 20 years. Other aspects, all important, microbial tools, the agroecosystems, agroecology, all are critical, and where we can, we should. But in my opinion, we will still have the conventional farming for the generations to come.
Thank you, Brajesh. I'm sorry, I can't take the last one. Please, could we do it after, if that's okay? Thank you. Can we thank Brajesh again for a fantastic presentation? Thank you. Thank you. I'm delighted now to introduce my second speaker, who I know from the work I do has always inspired my work, as members of his group, like Robert Huber is also there. So Professor Robert Finger is Professor of Agricultural Economics and Policy at ETH Zurich. He's chair of the World Food System Centre at ETH. He's published over 200 peer-reviewed publications. He's an elected member of the Extra-Parliamentarian Committee of Agricultural Policy in Switzerland. He's responsible for the Agropolitik blog, which is a really nice piece of work for French and German speakers that summarises academic papers for non-academic stakeholders, very important work. He's an editor and board member of several journals, including the American Journal of Agricultural Economics and the European Review of Agricultural Economics. And he is going to talk to us about farmer decision-making. So with a focus on pesticide use, looking at the role of digital innovation, policy, and farmer decision-making. And we're delighted that you can join us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for the very kind introduction, and thanks to the organizing committee for the invitation. It's really a great honor to be here today. I would like to start with a statement that probably that title is not solving all the world's problem, but if we want to have more sustainable, more resilient food systems, more resilient and sustainable kind of like landscapes, we need more. We need a fundamental change and transformation of our agriculture and food systems at large. And I'm going to talk about pesticides and digitalization. And this is only a small part of that big transformation, but I believe an important part. In my talk, I want to deliver 3 key messages. First one is we need to reduce pesticide use risk massively, and for that we need a diversity of farming system approaches. Second, digital technologies and innovations can play a vital role facilitating that process. And third, we are not yet there. So many of these approaches are not paying off for farmers, are not actually implementable at scale, and here we need policies to support that process. But, no. There we are. First of all, effective and efficient crop protection is absolutely essential for food security. It was also mentioned in earlier talks, essential for the provision of many ecosystem services and is essential for the economic viability of the agriculture sector. So crop protection, being effective and being efficient, is at the heart of producing but also sustainable agriculture production. And the challenge for that is becoming substantially larger in the future. First of all, we need to meet an increasing demand for food. And second, it was also mentioned, the kind of like pest and disease pressure is increasing, also due to climate change, actually at a very rapid pace. So this is increasingly becoming a challenge. And in the moment, our crop protection and pest management approaches often heavily rely on pesticides. And I wouldn't distinguish too much chemical synthetic and not, but I would just say that what is toxic we should reduce and the rest we may keep. And pesticides to some extent have been a big success story because the implementation and use of pesticides contributed to increase yield levels, make food cheaper and also safer to some extent, but we paid a very high price in that process. And that high price is, for example, kind of like visible in effects on human health, but also the use of pesticides contributes to the pollution and degradation of environmental systems, contributes to the loss of biodiversity. And these kind of like factors even have these kind of like repercussions on agriculture productivity. For example, if you kind of like destroy the ability of an agro-ecosystem to protect itself against pests, well, this is reducing the productivity. So here it's kind of like, it makes a lot of sense from many perspectives to think about like reductions of pesticide use. I'm not saying no pesticides, but reduction of pesticide use. And this is also a policy goal that was formulated by many countries in national action plans, by the European Union in the Farm to Fork strategy, even at a global level in the Global Biodiversity Framework. And many of these kind of like targets have in common that they try to achieve a 50% risk reduction by the end of this decade. So that's a lot. While many agree on the goals in general being good, so we need to produce food and we need to reduce pesticide use risk, the problem is, of course, how to go there. That's the painful part. And again, I would like to first make a link back to the food system. Also, food system changes and adjustments in there can contribute. Just think about like reducing or removing the food waste and loss that we have. 1/3 of our food is lost. If we don't have that, we need far fewer pesticides, right? And we have to change nothing in our agriculture production. However, this is not enough. So we do need to kind of like change our agriculture systems too to achieve these goals. So we need a transition to sustainable crop protection. And what sustainable crop protection might entail, which production systems, is of course very diverse. And I would like to highlight a couple of key elements for my understanding. I agree with what was said, that one of the most important points in that process is going to be how to make conventional agriculture that is in a moment heavily relying on pesticides more sustainable in a way that it uses less and less risky pesticides. And this is a key aspect, I believe, to achieve the global and national and European goals. For example, integrated pest management is an excellent kind of like instrument and strategy to reduce pesticide use. However, on paper, IPM is a fantastic concept, but in reality, farmers are only adopting a small fraction of the measures from IPM and not the full set that would allow to exploit the full potential. Why is that? It doesn't pay off. So if you do a bit better in pest management, nobody's going to pay you for that. You don't go in the shop and see, there's a label, this farmer used a bit less than average pesticides. I mean, this is not attractive for no one. So there's a kind of lack of economic opportunity in here. In contrast, the other big element that the European Union also wants to push is organic agriculture. You do have labels. Farmers are compensated for going into organic agriculture, higher prices, subsidies. But organic agriculture not only means no chemical synthetic pesticides, but there's also additional restrictions such as the restriction to not use mineral fertilizer. And you see there's space to the left and right, so I believe this is not the full picture, but there are things in between, many. But I just want to highlight two aspects that are in between. One, we do a lot of research on is pesticide-free but non-organic agriculture production. So this, for example, means in a specific crop or is in a specific rotation, you don't use pesticides, but you still use mineral fertilizer. As a result, the yield gap to conventional production is much smaller than for organic. It's easier for farmers to go in, But of course, you don't have all the benefits of organic farming. And this is not only like a theoretical construct, but we see that emerging in European agriculture. To the left, maybe you can read it, maybe not, but pesticide-free non-organic production is already now 50% of all wheat in Switzerland. So this is established. Retailers are paying a price markup for that. To the right, if you go to a French supermarket, it's likely that you see these tomatoes indicate produced without pesticides. So there are these examples there. However, it's a niche. It's going to stay a niche, but it's an important benchmark. And I also indicated there's probably something to the right of organic. So personally, I don't think that organic is, so to say, the end point of the evolution of all farming systems that we have. You can do better. Thea is smiling. You can do better in some respect. And what I mean with beyond organic has very different facets. In the sense of kind of like pest management, for example, organic agriculture also uses pesticides that are harmful for the environment and human health. So you can do better in, for example, not using copper in organic production systems. But usually you don't see that on a product. You also have production systems that perform equally well or better than organic, but are not organic because they use technologies that are not allowed. Soilless production, using GMOs, using new breeding technologies. So this might be then controversial, but this is something that is there. And actually, it's not so futuristic. Just if I go shopping in Zurich, I can buy a wine that is labeled pesticide-free. This is an organic wine that also doesn't use copper. This is a farmer achieving that with resistant varieties, with alternatives to copper. So this is something on the market. And likewise, we yesterday talked about vertical farms. And if you go in a Swiss supermarket, you will get herbs from an ETH spin-off, Yazai, in a vertical farm that basically declares all the things that you want to see from a product like organic, but is not organic because there's no soil. So there are these alternatives there. There is kind of like a broad range of these approaches that are there. And I believe it's not either or. We need a mixture of these approaches, especially because none of these approaches is going to be strictly better than the others in all cases. So especially if you look at the outcomes we are interested in, yield, environmental footprints, environmental footprint per unit of output, economic viability, the risks that are involved. I mean, there is not the solution that is better than all the other. We need them all in a good mixture at the right place. So in that sense, there are no arrows in between these things. All matters, we need it all. How to go there, however, is very specific for each of these kind of like production systems. And here I would start introducing these stages of transition, and I will give an introduction in a minute in more detail. So certainly, if you want to reduce pesticide use a bit, so to say, you can exploit some efficiency gains are there, and this is going to be enough. If you, however, want to go to pesticide-free or organic production, you need substitutes for pesticides. It's not allowed anymore. And if you actually really want to also drop, so to say, the copper application in a specific system, but then you need to really fundamentally redesign your agriculture system that works. So this is very different how to go to the individual systems and how to achieve a transition to these production systems and achieving efficiency and substitution and redesign is, I mean, there are a lot of approaches to do so, and in my talk I will now focus on digital innovations that they can play a role, but not saying it's the only way. There are many, many others, but there is one entry point for digital technologies. And of course, digitalization is rapidly transforming our societies, our daily life, our economies, also agriculture and food systems. We talk about the fourth revolution of agriculture we are actually in the moment. And this digitalization is not a specific technology, not a specific approach, but far in contrast is like a huge range of technologies that are heavily interlinked. And this is a very simplified kind of like structure for these things, what I understand from digital technologies in the agriculture sector. Usually at the bottom, many applications require some kind of georeferencing, location technologies, but also diagnostic tools that measure what is there, all the sensors we talked about, whether this is mounted on a tractor as here, whether this is in space, a satellite, whether this is the sensor that Santold showed yesterday is in the field. So there are many ways of measuring things. But this is bringing us almost nowhere. Measuring is not, I mean, this is nice, but it's only a starting point. It only starts making sense if you bring that knowledge that you have into real-world decision-making. And one thing are applicative tools like precision farming. So based on what you measure, based on what you have, you can give farmers guidance how to do decisions better. And this is kind of like a straightforward and very promising way. However, you can go beyond that and ask yourself, why cannot the technology simply make the decisions? I mean, why do we need the farmer? We can just make it an automated process. This is also part of that pathway. And last but not least, not all the digital innovations that matter, we will actually see on the field. Far in contrast, I would say some of the most important innovations we don't see, but are actually in the field of networks, information, communication that allows farmers to communicate with each other better with the companies, consumers, administration. So also that is an important element. And I would like to highlight that these technologies can play a vital role in supporting the process of efficiency, substitution, redesign, and thus can also promote the kind of like transition to lower pesticide production, pesticide-free production, organic and beyond organic production. So I just want to give now some examples for these points and illustrate it with specific technologies. Efficiency is nothing else than cutting away waste. And actually in our agriculture systems, we have a lot of wasteful application of pesticides, so we can reduce pesticide use by having the same yield. But obviously, you need some kind of guidance for that. And there are like three plus minus well-established technologies that actually allow efficiency gain presented here. Guidance systems, for example, just cut away kind of like application of pesticides that are redundant because you don't, I mean, there's no farmer driving the tractor anymore, so you don't have kind of overlapping application of pesticides. That saves you a few % of pesticides. Variable rate technologies may allow that you kind of like really only spray herbicides there in the field where you actually do have weed pressure, so reduce the amount of herbicides used but maintain the level of production. And also, for example, drones might be used to improve the efficiency of pesticide application in the field. So you can reduce pesticide use in a specific crop, and this to some extent, but not fully. And the next step, of course, would be to ask, can we substitute away from the pesticides that are harmful for the environment and human health and use other approaches? And also here, I believe digital technologies can play a vital role. We yesterday already talked about the weeding robots, so this is an example, also an ETH spin-off here, that then identifies weeds and control them with lasers. There are also other technologies that allow non-chemical weed control. And to the right, you see the dominant way of how the European corn borer is actually controlled in Switzerland. This is done with trichogramma applications, so a parasitoid wasp, using drones to release them. So it was clear that these trichogramma are very useful to control the corn borer before, but it was very hard and very costly to apply them in the field, and now you have a drone and it just like flies over there in an automated way and drops kind of like the larvae, and that's job done. And you switch to a large scale from, let's say, insecticides to a biocontrol approach just by having this very simple and cheap technology around that can be applied. So this is substitution. So I've shown we can, with digital technologies, gain efficiency, substitution, but both of these approaches, of course, have one big problem. They only address the problem and not the root cause of the problem. So we still have weeds, we still have insects, so that we want to control in that system. So the next step, obviously, would be to kind of think about how can we avoid that pests actually are occurring. And this is what we mean under redesign. And there are various approaches how to redesign agriculture systems that actually have fewer pest pressure. For example, using digital technologies to fundamentally reshape our landscapes, like here in the patch crop project at ZALF, but also the controlled environment farming that Central presented to me is a kind of like redesign, because in that system there's no need anymore for applying pesticides. There are also digital innovations that are cross-cutting and actually contribute to all the stages of transition. I would like to highlight the extremely important role of digital knowledge extension and advisory service and networks that can be established, that farmers actually get to know what are the alternatives that they can use, that they know about the evidence that is there about technologies, about farming systems. And likewise to the right, I would like to highlight possibly a large role of digital twins that can kind of like taking a real-world object like a field or a plant as a digital object, allowing to forecast kind of, for example, pest pressure, and also to, in a digital environment, test certain intervention strategies and how they actually will work. So this might be an opportunity to reduce or even fully avoid pesticide use, but just by kind of like in a digital environment, having that set up that allows to avoid that pests are occurring and you have to have an intervention. So there are many kind of like interesting technologies that can contribute to efficiency, substitution, and redesign. And these technologies, with these steps, can contribute that all these more sustainable crop protection approaches are becoming more attractive for farmers to be used, are becoming more effective. However, all these technologies and all these approaches are currently not used to the extent that we can reach the goals that we want to reach that I indicated earlier. So we are not yet there, and there are good reasons why farmers are not taking up the technologies, why farmers are not adopting organic farming at a large scale and so on. And there's not a single reason, but there's kind of like a combination, and this is a too complex figure, but just want to highlight. In the center here, you have farmers' adoption of sustainable crop production. You can extend it by including technologies that enable to do so. And there are different kind of like elements that matter for the adoption. First and foremost, to the top right, you see the technical and economic properties. So if the technology and if the farming system is not yet there, having a lot of uncertainty is very costly, is very kind of like risky, then farmers are very unlikely probably to go into it. So it matters how far and how good the technology actually is. To the top right, you see that also farmer-specific behavioral factors matter. Not every farmer is the same. Some farmers are open for innovation, open to go into risk, others not. We have to consider that. So not all farmers will be keen to adopt innovations. And to the bottom, you see also that the policy environment matters, for example, in terms of regulation, in terms of incentives that are given to either use pesticides or use alternatives, but also the market environment, such as the price markups that are paid for farmers. And looking at these digital innovations that I presented just a few minutes ago, I would summarize that with the following words. So there are economic opportunities for the farmers, but often these economic opportunities are too small to actually really allow and incentivize farmers to make a big investment, right? And one of the reasons for that is also, to be very honest, that pesticides are simply too cheap. So it's I said that it's an effective and also very cost-efficient strategy in the moment to use pesticides, and farmers are using that for very good reasons. They work and they are cheap. However, they have external costs. So kind of like addressing that and internalizing the external cost would be very beneficial. Other inputs that you may use to substitute pesticides are often very expensive. So the vertical farms we've seen yesterday in Zentol's presentation don't work also because they need a lot of energy, and energy is very expensive. So if you have that problem, it's very difficult to substitute. Digital innovations are often more knowledge extensive than using pesticides, but only for some technologies, maybe for a robot or a drone. For others, like the guidance systems, it's maybe not a big issue because it's kind of like there is no knowledge needed to apply a guidance system. You just click a button. And we also see that many side effects are actually very crucial. Often the effect of labor on labor demand is extremely important. And I said it already, farmers make an investment, and this investment brings also some risk, technology risk. Is the technology working on it or not? But also a risk how fast a new technology will be on the market matters here. There are policy barriers, for example, high regulation for drones, the use of drones for applying pesticides, and also the use of autonomous machinery. And we also have uncertain market environments. Is the technology that we use accepted at the market? Does it fit to labels? Is a fully automatized field that works organic still organic? Is that what associated with naturalness of organic? So there are some fundamental questions if we go deep into that process. So kind of like combining that, what I just said, I would like to highlight that I see the potential of digital technologies to reduce pesticide use risk at a combination between how much pesticides a technology can help to reduce and how scalable it is. And we've seen some technologies can save a few percent, like guidance systems, other almost all pesticides, but it also differs in respect to how they can be scaled. Some technologies are cheap and widely applicable, like precision farming, digital knowledge and extension services, and so on. Other technologies are still simply too expensive and face too high regulatory hurdles to be implemented fast at a large scale, like robots and maybe also controlled environmental agriculture. The potential, however, is extremely context-specific, right? For example, for vegetable, the robots often pay off already. For arable crops, they may have a hard time doing so. It also depends on the reference system. For example, in Europe, we have a well-established kind of and very effective way of applying pesticides. So farmers are not so interested in applying drones. In contrast, in Asia, this is not the case. Drones are actually taken up at a very rapid rate. And we also see that those approaches that actually redesign and the digital innovations that facilitate that process are often less easy to scale fast. So again, that remark, no strict superiority of a particular technology, production system, or stage of transition, if we consider all the aspects, so we really carefully need to consider what to put where and when. And there are also further risks and challenges associated with going into a pathway that we think digital technologies will help us in kind of like addressing the problem of sustainable, or achieving more sustainable crop protection. But there are many kind of like economic and social problems, for example, the digital divide. So we see that some farmers may be able to tap on digital technologies quite quickly. They can benefit from such a process, others not. We have a divide in the farming community, and this is not necessarily something that we want as a society, that policymakers want, that farmers want. We also have a potential increase of power concentrations, even more in the agricultural sector, if we put digital technologies in the hand of a few companies. Then many of these benefits might be taken up by the companies and not land in the hand of the farmers and or pay off in terms of large environmental gains. And I would like to highlight that digital and autonomous not per se means better for the environment. Like some of the technologies I've shown have a very bad environmental footprint, for example, because they use a lot of energy. And second, if you have an algorithm that basically guides your decision making, and this algorithm is not considering environmental factors, well then that's also not better, potentially even worse than it is today. So this is something that really needs to be considered. And when making that step to say, well, we want to use more digital technologies in plant protection, then we also run in new risks and challenges, such as systemic risk that come due to algorithmic biases, network vulnerabilities. We have fundamental questions of responsibility and accountability. So imagine you have an automated process that leads to an application of a pesticide somewhere in the field, and then later on you figure out this was the wrong pesticide, it wasn't allowed there. Who is accountable is kind of like an uncertainty. Is it the software provider, hardware provider, the farmer? But also, of course, fundamental questions of data ownership and management matter here. And all these risks and uncertainties, I'm not saying that we cannot overcome it. We should overcome them, but they make it today less attractive for many actors to go in that step and kind of engage in new technologies to bring sustainable crop protection to the next level. And this, of course, calls for policy in the sense of there is an opportunity that digital technologies can bring for sustainable crop protection. But there's also kind of like a price to be paid, a lack of economic viability, some risk and challenges involved. And this kind of like talks to there should be or could be a policy intervention. But I also would like to highlight that based on everything I said, I personally see a super large potential of digital technologies for more sustainable crop protection, but it's also not the panacea for it. And it's also no policy purpose on its own to have everything more digital in that sense. But there's a potential that we can exploit. And for example, we can exploit that potential by making pesticide risk reduction really at the forefront of our policy goals. And if we reduce pesticide use risk, then we make the alternatives for pesticides automatically more attractive. So if you put a tax on pesticides, a very heavy tax on pesticides, farmers are seeking very rapidly for technological solutions how to reduce pesticide use. For example, you can distribute the money back to the sector, that there's no income loss, but just giving the clear incentives is very important. And overall, there should be also kind of like an enabling environment and incentives given for farmers to apply most cost-efficient strategies, whether they are digital or not. For example, having the right infrastructure, legislation, education. Often we also lack that, especially for digital technologies. I said that economic instruments can play an important role, like taxes, but also targeted support, or also more a focus on result-based payments. And we also should look that we don't see the future of digitalization in the field of crop protection at the level of individual farms alone, because this is the crucial point. Technologies are knowledge intensive, are costly. So allowing farmers to collaborate and jointly use these technologies is going to be very important. We also particularly should push for redesign and a bit of efficiency and substitution, but I feel these things are also going to happen somehow on its own. And we should focus beyond pesticides, because digital technologies can be used for many different things in the farm management, and not only pesticides, and combining that probably then makes the economic viability substantially higher. So to conclude, we need to reduce pesticide risk. And to achieve that, we need a diversity and innovation in the production systems we use, along that efficiency, substitution, redesign gradient. Digital innovations can facilitate that process, but are not the only component to facilitate that process. However, in the moment, these technologies kind of like really differ largely in respect of their reduction, their potential to reduce pesticide use, and also their scalability, especially in the short term. Often we see that the economic viability is missing of many technologies, many approaches. There are regulatory hurdles. And here, responsible governance and policies can help to untap the big potential. And last but not least, I started with it, I end with it. It's only part of the story, so we need to focus beyond pesticides, and we also need an embedding in a larger agriculture and food system transition. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We've got 12 minutes for questions. So short questions, one question each. And also, if you haven't asked a question at this conference so far, please do feel free to. So start there, please. Two in the middle here. Whoever's got the mic. Two in the middle at the front. Thank you.
Great, very clear. Thank you. Davide Rizzo, landscape agronomist. Data are not tangible. This is a main problem when we are talking about landscape. And now the connection is done more and more by machine and a kind of remote knowledge. How to bring back data in the field with people? Hard question.
Yes, thank you very much. So I think it's connecting to the observation that, let's say you collect data and then it's just transmitted somewhere else. An algorithm would compute what to do, bring it back on the screen, or even not. Just the farmer, the farmer doesn't need to process the data and cannot bring maybe their own knowledge in that process. And I think that's important in terms of acceptability, that farmers know this is not a black box, and then also giving an opportunity to bring in their own expertise of a specific field, of a specific system. I mean, I think that's much more important to combine also, let's say, traditional knowledge with digital technologies. And we have colleagues from Bayer here that probably have good solutions how to do that with field view, their product that they provide to farmers. Maybe we can chat over coffee on that there.
Great, thank you. I think I've got three waiting. Hard question, but short question. You did well, David. Excellent.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. You focused on digital innovations, obviously, but of course there are many other things to change. I think, for example, of intercropping, of mixing crops as a way to reduce pesticides, and this also needs some new plant breeding for crops that are suitable for mixed cropping, etc. Yeah. So what do you think in such a direction? Or there are many others, of course.
Absolutely, and I would personally see these approaches that you mentioned also under the redesign. I mean, this is also a redesign of agricultural landscapes fundamentally, right? If you start that way. And also here, I would say, I mean, we know that it actually is beneficial, but it's too costly, often too difficult still. And there might be opportunities also from digital technologies. I think that's what many people here in the room also work on. But again, it's probably not the only thing that we need. So it also needs kind of like training, education, good evidence that it actually works. But I don't see, I mean, I see what you said integrated here on the redesign. And I think that's absolutely important what you also say. Thank you very much.
I'm going to go a couple down here where the mic's here, then I'm going there. So, Andrea.
Yeah, Andrea Knierim, University of Hohenheim. Thanks for the very rich talk. It became very clear that with digitalization, it's a paradigmatic change in the sector and in the agri-food systems. And I was wondering whether you can say a few words where you see the biggest learning efforts beside farmers. So there are many different actor groups involved in this transition. If you now would negotiate about policies, where would you invest funds to improve learning or to increase the knowledge beside farmers?
So you still mean in the field of digital technologies? Yeah, so I mean from a policy perspective, I would really underline that, I mean obviously we need kind of an environment that it's actually there. So there was a survey made by Agroscope a few years ago with agricultural schools in Switzerland and asking like how well did you see digital technologies being covered in your program, and it was a kind of like frustrating for the schools response. So I mean there is still like a lot to invest, and I would say easy and good invested money in terms of like education, information, but also creating these kind of like I would say legal environments that things are very clear what to use where and how. There's still a lot of uncertainty involved there. This is important, and then I said that all the other technologies, like really focusing only on technologies and saying the government has to finance like development of kind of like bringing new technology in the market or putting subsidies on specific technologies. I'm a bit hesitant. I would rather start with the problem. If I want to reduce pesticides, then I make policies that pesticide use is becoming less attractive, and that makes the alternatives more attractive. So this, I would rather see the indirect approach there, but it needs a solid foundation that digital technologies can be used, are there, people know about it, and can be applied in a responsible way, because again, I also said that there are some limitations potentially. Just having technologies in the market might not necessarily be the best possible outcome if no policymaker is steering that system.
Thank you. I'm going to go here because I denied your question last time and then there.
Okay.
Sorry, behind Andrea. There. Frank.
Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Robert. You still are replacing an input by another when you have digital, and as you said, it's not per se sustainable. I have a dream that to make an hybrid between your two presentations. If we push what Brajesh presented very well, to say instead of microbiome-based solution, you have a microbiome-based prophylaxis. where you do not need anything. You just need input from research. What is the potential economic model that you could propose for both supporting the farmers and farmers' decision-making and research and all the legal aspects that are related to that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I fully agree with you that digital alone, and I said it a couple of times, digital alone is not the way forward, and there are different other approaches, and you may combine them, right? I mean, why not guide inoculation of a specific subject in the soil exactly at the point where it's needed and guided by measurement of sensors? So I think there we have a lot of consensus and connection in this sense. And how to make these approaches more viable? I mean, yeah, you see it here. So basically, farmers need alternatives that work. I mean, this is often what we kind of like think, oh wow, now we developed a robot and bring it to the field, and then a farmer tests it and it doesn't work. But farmers have to live with that and actually have to make their living on that. So that's actually, we need really well-functioning alternatives for pesticides. That's important. And we also need economic incentives. I think that's crucial. I believe there's an opportunity for markets. I talked about the labels, so pesticide-free, organic, and so on, they can get a label. The zero pesticides might be a label then too, where you can basically get a compensation from consumers. But also policy may compensate if you deliver certain services to the society by not using specific things. There's some argument that farmers are compensated for that. And that makes the transition more, viable for farmers. And I believe it's also good that they have many pathways they can go and actually choose from what fits for them. But there needs to be an incentive to go there. And it's a bit carrot and stick. We need some regulation. We need economic incentives. And then they have to have opportunities that work, that are well functioning, that they can actually implement them based on their own experience and knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you for waiting up there.
Okay. Thanks a lot for the great talk, Robert. Picking up maybe on this last point, and you started and ended with it saying, okay, there's technological solutions, but we can also think of solutions around redesign of food systems, demands, and market. And do you have any insights on the relative share of publicly funded research that looks at this technology and supply side, which essentially demands behavior change of farmers, versus publicly funded research focusing on consumer behavior change and demand? And I guess I ask it because I think when we focus so much on technological solutions, we also put a lot of good information and knowledge out there in that space, and policymakers maybe look at, just reflections on that.
I don't have numbers, but I look at Frank. He usually knows all the numbers by heart. But I see your point. So if we talk about like agriculture and food system transformation, then we also have to be honest that we have to change something on the side of consumption. But I would be extremely careful in kind of like playing the bad guy to the one or the other. Blaming consumers that they don't do well and back to the farmers probably brings us nowhere, but we need to have both. We need to have kind of like a demand for things that are new, come to the market so that can develop together. And there is consumer research, also in German agricultural economic departments, and I think that's also extremely important research in that field. But I also believe that implementing policy changes at the level of consumers is fundamentally more difficult than policy changes at the level of farms, because very few of us in a room are farmers, but all of us are consumers. So we can probably vote our hand and say, well, taxing pesticides is a good thing, but if we come to taxing meat and taxing specific products in the shop, we are not that easy in raising the hand, yes, go for it. So I believe it's still like not that easy how to make the transition, but we need that. And this is an important point. We need not only focus on agriculture and not only on consumption, but really understanding that this is a system that functions together, including, it was yesterday mentioned, the imports to Europe. We cannot just like reduce the production here and have more imports, and with that just bring our footprint somewhere else in the world. So A, we need to maintain some production here, and B, we also need to play a role in making the production somewhere else more sustainable if we want to have a more sustainable world. So this is a kind of like a bigger picture, I believe, where these policies and also allocation of money likely needs to be embedded.
I've got a few questions for you. I'm not going to get all of them in on the basis, Frank, that you're closest to get him afterwards. And I know you're in charge. But
that is only a short question.
Okay,
Thanks a lot
very
for the
short,
great.
because I've got to go there.
Thanks a lot for the great talk, Robert. I want to come back to the topic of the conference, Agro-Ecosystems in Transformation. We're talking big changes here. And with respect to the direction of your talk, digitalization, I would be curious to understand or hear from you, where do you see the biggest potential along the three categories that you described, efficiency, or looked at efficiency, substitution, and redesign for digitalization to contribute to this transformation?
Yeah, I try to make that point. So I believe the efficiency and substitution things, are the game changers in terms of fundamentally redesigning, but they might be easy to scale, easy to implement. But we also need to have the redesign component, right? And if we run in a trap that we just say we harvest the low-hanging fruits and forget about the big changes, about the big transformation, then we also do harm to our own future. So this is a bit the tricky point, how to combine these things. I mean, I see your point. I would like to say it's only redesign and, stop doing that. But I believe there's also a good argument that we do have like a strive for more efficiency and substitution. Because also, I said that in the beginning, I don't think that in 10 or 20 years, all the farming systems will be pesticide-free. But the biggest leverage that we have is making conventional agriculture much more sustainable. And there, of course, redesign also plays an important role. But in the short run, we can also harvest from efficiency and substitution and so on.
I'm going to take one more. I'm very sorry for those who I can't take. Just one more, if that's okay. And if you could answer in 30 seconds, it'd be great. Otherwise, the photographer will tell me off.
Yeah, Fabian Klebel from ZALF. Thank you very much. I'm here.
Sorry.
This is a very common question, but I have to raise it anyway. Where are the small farmers in your considerations?
Yeah.
Because yes, you can say they can share the machinery, which is often not feasible at all. And also it comes at a higher transaction cost for the smaller ones.
Yeah, exactly. So I tried to make that point, but too short. So that's actually in here, going beyond single farms, where I made that point that often digital technologies may not be affordable for small farms, so they cannot access that opportunity. Then we have the digital divide, saying we have big, rich farms that can invest good knowledge, but then we have small farms that are falling behind, and that would be, catastrophe to some extent. So we also should look for models how small farms can benefit from the technologies. That might be either that farms team up and jointly use new technologies to manage their farms together. Might be also that some technologies are just coming by contractors into the system, and or that you really also look for very cheap and easy to implement approaches. So I think there are very promising approaches where you have with cheap technologies like a smartphone also can actually deliver quite a lot of information to farmers taken from sensors from somewhere else that can guide the decision making. But I fully agree with you that this is crucial, both in Europe, because not all farms are going to keep pace with that, and especially if you go to other parts in the world.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for those who haven't been able to ask questions. First, the green umbrella person is over there for the photograph, so follow that person. But before we go, can we say again a great thank you to Brajesh and Robert for doing this.